Hi, everyone. My name is Kadia, and I'm a doctoral candidate in the College of Education and the Multicultural Resource Center Graduate Assistant. The role of the MRC is to foster knowledge, skills, understanding, and awareness in the areas of multiculturalism and diversity under the oversight of the College of Education's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. In that same light, I'm so pleased to welcome the second of our speakers in our activism speaker series, Diamond Carr. Diamond is a doctoral candidate in the school psychology program. She's currently working as an intern for Loudoun County Public Schools and a data and equity consultant for Easton Area School District. Her commitment to students' experiences related to race opened the door for her to act as a consultant at her former practicum site, EASD. She developed the Student Speak Up group in the school psychology program, which is focused on creating a safe space for graduate students to share their challenges and progress working with diverse populations. This group also provides education around working with diverse populations to promote equitable practice. She's also committed to this work in her research, as her dissertation focused on a strengths-based approach to identify protective factors believed to promote minoritized students' achievement. Diamond is unapologetically committed to identifying systemic barriers that perpetuate opportunity gaps for children of color. I am so pleased to welcome Diamond. Diamond, over to you.
Hello, and thank you all for having me. I am so looking forward to sharing with you all today and hope that everyone takes something away from my discussion today. So I've entitled this Advocacy and Activism, Know When to Add and When to Act. As I go throughout this presentation, it is my goal to share my story to make my points more poignant to you. So, a little bit about me first. I am Christian, I am Black, I'm a cisgender woman. I am currently still a graduate student until I walk in May and technically graduate in August, but I am definitely committed to being a lifelong learner even beyond my degree. As Katie has said, I'm also an intern and I am a consultant. So in thinking about all of the identities that I've shared and the intersectionality of them, right, knowing that all of these identities are occurring simultaneously and they are dynamic and all of them work together to influence how I interpret the world and how I respond to the world. That is also true in terms of this conversation or this discussion or talk that I am providing today. So keeping all of those things in mind and being transparent about who I am and how those identities are influencing what I share with you today. So first, I have to define some terms. What is an advocate and what does activism mean? So an advocate, as you see listed here, is one who speaks or writes in support of another or a cause. And I juxtapose this to activism, where someone takes action, direct action, to achieve a political or a social end. So we're going to talk a little bit about what each of these things looks like, specifically how it has looked for me in being both of these. Actually, in preparing for this talk, when I was first asked, I went back and forth with it and I told my brother, and he said, "Are you an activist?" And I said, "I don't know." And it made me delve into what an advocate is, what an activist is, because I've always thought of myself as an advocate. And as a school psychologist, oftentimes you are being an advocate. You are in the room speaking on behalf of the best interests of your students. And so I was no stranger to advocacy, but activism is something I really had to delve deeper into and reflect as to, had I ever really taken direct action to achieve some end, political, social, educational, whatever that might be? Have I ever taken a direct action? So hopefully we'll be able to answer that as we go throughout this discussion. So when am I an advocate? I'm an advocate when I'm in the room, and particularly when I'm in the room and the people around me that I would like to speak for or am speaking for their experience, particularly, for example, students as a school psychologist, when I'm in the room and they're not. right? And so having worked with the students prior to, for example, in assessments, and having observed them and maybe doing rating scales with them and talking to their parents, I gather all of this information, and now I'm in the room and I have to speak to their psychological well-being, their mental health, how they are learning and thinking. I have to speak to all of these things. And I have to speak to it in support of their development, in support of their achievement. So I am present and they are not. And I'm doing the best that I can to speak to the things that are going to best support them based on the knowledge that I have from having interacted with them. Now to the right, you see this image of all of these yellow ducks, and I have no idea what the numbers mean, so don't ask. But in the middle, you see this red duck. And the red duck is the only red duck amongst this sea of yellow ducks. And oftentimes, we are the only ones, particularly for me as a person of color, right? So having identified my identities as being Black, for example, throughout my graduate training, I was often the only one in the room. I can remember early on in my training, particularly like the first, second year, where at one point we were reading God Bless the Child by Toni Morrison. And it was a book, if you have not read it, about a Southern Black woman and her experience. She's a darker skinned woman. She has some difficulties with her mom. She just has a really hard time with life. And as a Black person, the only Black person in the room, I often found myself trying to balance the narrative written in the book by Toni Morrison, who is a phenomenal writer, or was a phenomenal writer, may she rest in peace, and the reality that that's not the only story for Black people, for Black women, for Black America, right? While also balancing that while I could say that, I could not speak to all Black people's experience. So I was the only one in the room. And I also had felt this duty to represent the voices of other Black people and Black stories that were not told in that particular story. There's a TED Talk that talks about the danger of a single story, right? And that kind of speaks to that point. I'm also an advocate when people feel or have been disempowered. So sometimes you're in a room and the people may be present, right? The people for whom you are speaking or advocating for, but they may not feel like they have the power, right? That what they say, the experience that they bring, they may not feel validated in that space. They may not feel like they have enough to add, or maybe if I do have something to add, how I will add it, right? Can they get past my speech? Can they get past the delivery of how I say it? Will they stick to, I missed a word, I said a time or two, or can they grasp the gist of what I'm saying? As a person who will have a doctoral degree in a matter of months, I recognize that there's a certain level of privilege that I have, right? There is a certain power that comes with PhD at the end of my name, that when I speak, or when people just see my title, they recognize it comes to them. She has training, she comes from a certain skill set, she's able to speak and communicate. And all of those things are true. But even if I did not have those things, they would be true, right? I would still be able to speak to something, my experiences that I've had, or something that I am passionate about. However, when you're in a room where there are people who feel disempowered and you know this, and you have the ability from having spoken with them, having lived with them, whatever that might be, to speak for them, and not for them absent of their voice, but for them because they feel voiceless. There is a difference. So when you're in that room, recognize your privilege, whether that's because of your educational status, whether that's because of your gender, your sexual orientation, your race. There are some times where I spoke to being the only one, where even though I was the only Black person in the room, in some cases that works to my benefit, right? And in other cases, maybe it's a little more challenging, but recognizing when your identities and which of your identities give you privilege and how to navigate that in those spaces when you are trying to advocate for someone else. And acknowledging the reality. So this is some of the realities of things I have faced in my experience in doing this work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I spoke a little bit about when we were in my first, one of my first classes, and we were reading the book by Toni Morrison. And I talked about my experience in trying to balance, this is the story told in this narrative, and this is the story that I am aware of, right? So my story as compared to the character was very different. I came from a 2-parent household. My parents are still married to this day. I had a younger brother. I went from public schools to private schools, went to a 4-year institution, went right into grad school. I had a very different experience than the story that was told, and God bless the child. And there was this pressure in the class because I am such a vocal person. I think it became understood that Diamond will speak to this. And so there was this pressure to represent the whole, where the truth of the matter is I could not. And so I found myself often saying, this is true of Diamond's experience. This does not represent all of Black America. And that's true. What I speak to may be true for me. It may be true for some of the Black people that I know, but it is not true for all Black people. And so I have to acknowledge that I'm speaking for my experience with these identities, with these different avenues that I have explored in my life. And then also I had this conviction, right? Like this overwhelming feeling to speak up. Because when you're in a room and an identity that you hold is maybe being misrepresented, or maybe even not misrepresented, but not completely represented, right? So it's not that what people are saying is wrong, but it's incomplete. They're missing part of the picture. And so when you have this conviction to speak up, you have to balance that conviction with your capacity. What is in my power to do? So oftentimes in this work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we feel the weight of the systemic pressures, right? In my introduction, I talked about the systemic barriers that I'm committed to breaking and helping to challenge, particularly for people and students of color. And what I recognize is I cannot break that barrier alone. So while I feel compelled and drawn to that work, and unapologetically so, I recognize that also I need allies. And also there are some battles, as my mom would say, pick your battles. So there are some things I can speak to and fight for, and others that I cannot. And so whatever the role is that you play, do it with everything that you have in this work. Do it, commit to it, and when you can't, when you come to a point where, you know what, I've given all I can, or I have done all I can, I have said all I can, this is now it's above me, rest in that you gave it all that you could when you did. Because we cannot make change overnight. And we'll talk a little bit more about that point in a moment. So when am I an activist? As you can see, the swoosh to my right is Nike, just do it. Just do it. It's the action, the direct action that you are taking. I reflected as I was preparing for this speech about my time in undergrad. And I was a Bonner Scholar, so I was into community service. And I also took this class that focused on community-based participatory research. And when I took this class, we had this professor who had a very relaxed kind of attitude. And we went into the community. I went to school at Rider University, and so it was near the Trenton community. And we worked and spoke to the people of the community and said, oh, we're going to do all of these things. And we had collected census data, and we've gone through it and looked at different facets of the community and maybe what they needed. And the community was really standoffish, for lack of a better word, and very hesitant to engage and to share. And when we inquired, they said, you know, you all are not the first to come here and make these promises about all of these things that you all are going to do. We've seen it, we've heard it before, we'll believe it when we see it. And that stung, right? Because there I was, again, a Black student, and I was not the only Black person in the class, but my professor was not Black. This community was predominantly Black. And so I felt like I owed it to them to see this project through. And again, keep in mind, I am a student, an undergrad student in this class. And so we did not see the project through. I don't remember what happened. I don't remember how far we got even. I think at one point we maybe like had some sort of event, but nowhere near the things we had promised. And upon reflection, I think, what is the direct action I could have taken in order to fight and stand up for whatever the goal and outcome was that we were trying to achieve? Even if we could not achieve all of the things we had set forth and promised or intended to fulfill, could I have gone back to the professor and said, hey, we at least owe it to go back to the community and tell them what we could or could not do and why? so that they're not left hanging. Because then it also leaves an avenue open for the university to continue to do work, but then also for the community to feel like even though they couldn't, they came back. They were honest. We feel like we have some sort of relationship and rapport that we can go back. Because when you're in a community, it should be a bi-directional relationship, right? So even Lehigh as an institution, Bethlehem may be a college town, right? Like Moravian is next door, but then there are communities like Easton or communities like Allentown. What are we giving back to that community? What are we doing to support those communities? That's activism. So activism or being an activist is when I conduct a study using the methodology and considerations for which I've advocated. So for me, oftentimes we go through this comprehensive exam process, and one of the core competencies has to do a lot with culture, which is my area of like expertise. It's my strength. And a lot of times I talk about how we study and speak about children and students of color. And with my dissertation, I was able to do something with that. I stopped talking about it and advocating for this is how research should be conducted, and I did it. I took my dissertation, hard as it may have been, in a predominantly Latinx community school and worked with the school. What are the things you want to know? Here are some things that I'm interested in. What are some things you're interested in? How can we work together to make this something that will benefit the school? And that's what I did. I also did not compare students of color in my study to white students. And I found that there was some pushback about that because I ended up not including white students at all. And there was some hesitancy about, well, why would you do that? When oftentimes in clinical studies and other things, there are only white people in the sample. We never question it. Activism is doing something. So I did this and I was prepared for what was going to come in response. So I used that methodology. I took consideration for what the community needed and took from their voices, and then also went back. So I talked about how in my past as a student, I had not gone back. And this time I did. I went back to the families and I went back to the teachers and staff and shared the data that I got back. I got their feedback. And as a consultant this year, I'm able to use some of that information we got to help to support them this year in terms of social emotional response, responses to discipline, training of teachers, all of those things. I'm also an activist when I use culturally responsive and sensitive practices, right? And culture does go beyond race. I'm sure we know this, right? But it's these shared beliefs and values that a certain people group hold. And so recognizing, valuing those and responding appropriately to those, incorporating those in the stories we tell, in the curriculum we use, in the materials we empower. And then include the voices and perspectives of those with whom you work and for whom you fight for change. Part of the big thing with the term co-decolonization is working with, not for, a community or a group, right? So it's doing the work with, it's partnering with, and not doing it for. Because the truth of the matter is, particularly if I don't share this identity, I don't understand the experience, and I cannot do it for you. So you have to find people when you are doing this work that are from or that have experienced the things that you are passionate about and that you are looking to fight for change for, and help them, empower them, and work with them using your skill set, your expertise, your passion to fight for change. That's activism. So bringing it all together, advocacy. Advocacy is one who speaks or writes in support of another or a cause. It's in what you say, and what you say is more than what comes out of your mouth. It's how you write. It's how you write your paper, graduate student. It's how you write in your evaluations. It is how you write your dissertation. And it is how you speak in classes. It is how you speak to the people that you work with, your clientele, your students, your fellow staff. All of those things matter. In support of another or a cause. Support means partnership. That's that pairing, that's that partnering, that's working with. And what's your cause? If you don't take too much away from this talk, I want you to think about your cause. I want you to think about your passion. Think about the thing that when you walk in the room and you hear it or you see it, it irks your nerves, it boils your skin crawls, and you feel the heat rising. I get that kind of angry when I hear things about inequalities and things that are said about people of color and assumptions that are made about their families. It grinds my gears. That's my why. That's my cause. And you're going to need that when it gets hard. You're going to need that when you face opposition. It's that fire that will continue to fuel you. It'll be that log. And in activism, you take direct action. Again, you don't do it for, you work with. And to the point I made earlier about change, you have to be flexible because change is messy. This work is not easy. It is not always fun. It is challenging, but it is worth it. And it is a process. It's just like your graduate training. It's a process. It starts all fun and hunky-dory and you're passionate. Get to about year 3 and you're like, You get to year 4, year 5, and you're like, I'm almost there, but yet so far. And then where I am in your 6th year and getting ready to graduate. You cannot believe the things you've been able to accomplish, how far you've come. It was a process. It was messy. I wanted to quit every year, almost every semester. Came really close. But I had people around me, partnerships that helped me, pushed me to keep going. And now I'm at the end. Change, maybe it doesn't have an end, but it has rungs on a ladder. It's a process. Keep walking the path. Add when you can't and act when you can. Thank you for your time today.
Ooh, Diamond, I was just getting chills listening to your talk. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your work with us. Definitely so much empowerment embedded in those words. And thank you wherever you are joining us and watching us from. We hope you'll take a few moments as well to fill out the reflection form that can be found in the caption below and let us know if you or someone you know would make a great next speaker for our series. I cannot say it enough, Diamond. Thank you so much. And we are looking forward to the way you will advocate and be an activist.